So as you can see, over the course of several generations, the Roman government takes shape. I will repeat just the most important elements. Every year, two consuls are elected. The consuls are the heads of state and the commanders of the army for 1 year. After 1 year, they become permanent members of the Senate. The Senate is composed of about 300 men, and they are the ones who debate and make laws. In addition to that, you have five tribunes of the people elected every year. And the five tribunes have the power to defend plebeians in court. They are the only ones who can introduce legislation to the Senate, and they have veto power over any law. And then you have the assembly of the people. The assembly of the people is basically everyone who's a citizen. And after 287, the assembly of the people has the right to pass laws that are binding, that are valid on every member of society. And of course, if you look at this chart, there are other elements here. There are additional assemblies, and there are censos and curials, ediles. There are all of these different positions that cover different aspects of government. And all of these positions take place through elections. And a very complex government, but fully operational. Now, what kind of system is this? Is this a democracy? Is this an oligarchy? Is this what is it according to our old definitions, right? According to old Aristotle, what would this be? Well, it's hard to tell because there are so many different elements, but most people are comfortable with calling this an oligarchic republic, meaning that there is some element of democracy because there are elections and there's some participation from segments of the people, but really the people who run it are the wealthy, the new families called the nobles. Most of them are patricians, but some of them have now plebeian blood. Uh, it is the wealthy who run things. But there are elements of everything in this government also. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that as the Roman system is evolving, they're also beginning to expand. Little by little, they conquer their Latin neighbors, and then after conquering their Latin neighbors, they conquer other groups, and then they conquer the Etruscans, and then they move against the Sabines. And as you can see, over the course of several centuries, from that little red area in the center, they begin to expand, expand, and expand. And the Romans adopt a very interesting approach to conquest. When they defeat an enemy, they make that enemy an ally, and they incorporate that enemy into the Roman Confederation. But this is a really interesting confederation because federations are really, you have different members, and all the members are equal or have some degree of equality or some uh, common rights. The Roman Federation is actually individual relationships between Rome and other cities. So, for example, if there are 20 cities that are part of that confederation, Rome has a relationship with each one of those 20 cities, but those cities cannot have any relationship among them. So, Rome is the center. Rome runs things. However, they pass a couple of laws that are useful. For example, if you are a Latin city, and that's what is called the Latin franchise, if you're a citizen of a Latin city that is now part of, is an ally, and the term, the Latin term for ally is soci, SOCI. That's where our word society or social comes from. So the associated cities or allies, their citizens have the right to trade in Rome and be protected by the same laws as Roman merchants, and they also have the right to marry Roman citizens. That means that the children will be citizens. And that's how Rome extends its base. A lot of people who eventually become very important in Rome originally were not Roman. They came from other cities that through these laws were integrated into Roman society. So eventually, the army of Rome keeps growing because there's another element to this pact. When Rome goes to war, for every soldier that Rome puts on the field, the allies have to put another one. So if Rome can put 100 soldiers, then each city that is part of that confederation has to put 100 soldiers. If Rome can put 1,000, then each one has to put in 1,000. And then you can see how Rome is creating the foundation for a huge pool of manpower. And you will see how important that will become in the future. The destiny of Rome as an empire begins to change during the period of Pyrrhus, king of Epirus. Epirus is a country that is north of Greece, basically what today is Albania. And Pyrrhus was one of those Hellenistic kings, one of the people who ruled over those kingdoms that emerged after the death of Alexander the Great. Epirus was poor in resources, but it produced great soldiers. So Pyrrhus made money by lending his services to other kings. So kind of, well, not kind of, a mercenary, really. So in the year 280, the southern cities, the Greek cities of southern Italy, asked Pyrrhus for help. The Romans are harassing us. The Romans want to take over. Bring in your army. Now, the army of Pyrrhus was state of the art. I mean, this army had a very strong infantry, had a very well trained cavalry, and they even had elephants. Elephants, if you remember, were first encountered by Europeans in India when Alexander went there. After the death of Alexander, an Indian ruler gave a herd of elephants to one of the successors of Alexander. And those elephants were bred, and eventually, most of the armies of North Africa and the Middle East, a lot of these Hellenistic armies, had elephants in it. So Pyrrhus arrives in the year 280 BC in southern Italy to teach a lesson to those Romans. So he brings his Macedonian phalanx, his cavalry, and his elephants. And at the Battle of Heraclea, he defeats the Romans. Horrible defeat. The Romans are crushed. And then Pyrrhus begins to move north. Now, the Romans in the year 390 BC had an experience. The Gauls, that is Celts, invaded Italy, and while the Rome was out looking for them, the Celts took the city with all the women and children inside. So the Celts said, "We will let you have your city and your families back if you give us a certain amount of money." And of course, the Romans had to collect the money, the gold, and pay the ransom so that their families could be let go and their city be returned. After that incident, the Romans swore that if they go to war, they either win and they dictate the terms of the peace, or they die. But there's no surrendering. There's no dealing in a position of inferiority. And they took that to heart. So in 280, after Pyrrhus defeats the Romans, he expects that they will deal, they negotiate and say, no, we won. So they put together another army. And then there's going to be another battle, the Battle of Asculum. And at that battle, the Romans lose again. But this time, Pyrrhus took a lot of casualties. And when one of his generals goes and says, King Pyrrhus, congratulations, you have won the battle. And Pyrrhus says, another victory like this, and I'm bankrupt. I'm ruined. And that's where the term Pyrrhic victory comes from. A Pyrrhic victory is a victory that is so costly that it might as well have been a defeat. After that, Pyrrhus has to go back. Pyrrhus comes back in 275 BC with a larger army. And this time, he kind of defeats the Romans, but it's even harder. And after that, he just disappears from Italy. He goes back to Greece and he dies while he was taking the city of Argos. But this is what we learn from this. You see, the Romans learned the first defeat at the hands of Pyrrhus was devastating. The second was bad, but not as bad. The third, they almost win. And that means that the Romans learn. They learn fast, they adapt, and their system enabled them that, even if they get so many casualties, you can still put together another army. That will become very useful when they confront their most serious danger, the Carthaginian Empire. Carthage in North Africa was a city founded by the Phoenicians. And by the 3rd century BC, they had really built up an empire that included the coast of Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, and a significant section of Spain. Like their ancestors, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians were great sailors, and they started to take control over some of the islands in the Mediterranean, uh, Sardinia, and Sicily. And of course, Sicily is to the south of Italy. When they get to Sicily, they start to interact with people who were in the sphere of influence of Rome. So it is inevitable that the Romans and the Carthaginians will fight at one point. From 264 to 246 BC, the First Punic War will take place. The word Punic refers to the name Puni, which is what the Romans called the Phoenicians. So the Punic Wars are the wars between Rome and Carthage. There are three of them. The first one lasts 20 years and doesn't go very well for the Romans for the first couple of years, especially because, as you can see, a lot of the Carthaginian Empire has to be reached by sea. The Romans didn't have a navy. According to the legend, one day a Carthaginian ship was shipwrecked off the coast of Italy, and that's how the Romans learned to build ships. Of course, that's a legend. That didn't happen. The reality is that the Romans hired Greeks to produce good vessels, and they learn how to build them themselves. They learn how to man them and sell them, and how to go to war. And after 20 years, the Carthaginians were defeated. And that meant that Rome was no longer just a local power in Italy, it became a Mediterranean power. One of the generals who had been defeated on the Carthaginian side was called Hamilcar. And Hamilcar had a young son who was 12 years old. In front of the temple of the god Baal, the main god of the Carthaginians, Hamilcar made his son Hannibal swear eternal hatred against the Romans. Never give up until you see Rome destroyed. And this young boy, who probably was 12, 13 at the time, he grew up with that hatred in his heart. Of course, Hannibal Barca, that's his last name, Hannibal Barca was also one of the most talented commanders in history. As part of the settlement of the First Punic War, the Carthaginians had control over Spain. So Hannibal, who became the commander of the Carthaginian forces in Spain, started to build up a big army. And in the year 218 BC, he decided to move against the Spanish allies of Rome. And that's basically a declaration of war. So this is the beginning of the Second Punic War, which will last for about 17 years. These reenactors show you what the Carthaginian soldiers look like, a little bit like the hoplites. You can see they have armor, they have shields, not as big. They have spears and helmet protection. Pretty decent infantry, not the best infantry in the world, but they're very they're solid according to the ancient accounts. These are the Roman soldiers who fought in the Punic Wars. Really interesting because their equipment is a combination of all kinds of things. You see, the shields are kind of rectangular, and but this allows them to close ranks. If you see, they're wearing helmets that have straps that tie around the your chin. These straps make the helmets more comfortable and still give protection. The helmets usually have a section that protects your neck, and they're not wearing The armor that they're wearing is mainly chainmail. Chainmail are little rings of iron that you create a gown. That was produced by the Celts. And if you look at this image, the shoes called the caliga, very comfortable shoes. They are adaptable. You can you can tie them and adjust them. In winter, you can actually put the equivalent of socks, and they still fit because they just fully open. Having good shoes is essential for any soldier. Very very important, and they had good shoes. The Romans. Um, these soldiers use spears. They use swords, and as you see, the fellow behind, a javelin, a throwing javelin. They have some cavalry, but they're not renowned for that. And these are the two armies that will confront each other during the Second Punic War. So Hannibal decides that this time the war is going to be fought on Italian soil. Rather than taking this army with a fleet by sea, he's going to go across Spain, over the Pyrenees Mountains, across southern Gaul, over the Alps, and then arrive through the north of Italy. Very daring. Now, going by sea is risky because if there's a storm, if something happens, the fleet sinks and he loses his army. But going across land is going through territory that he doesn't know. So when he arrives at the Pyrenees, which are the second tallest mountain range in Europe, he has to hire some local guy to take him through the mountains passes. And then when he lands on the other side, he has to negotiate with the Gauls to let him go across. And then when he reaches the Alps, which are the tallest mountains in Europe, again, he has to negotiate with locals and guides to take him over. But then he arrives on the other side. Now, remember, he is marching with a large army. This army has about 40,000 men, horses, mules, and even elephants, which is something that the Romans had never seen. So he appears on the other side of the Alps, and the Romans panic. Hannibal at Portas, Hannibal at the gates. It's the end. And they put together an army, and as soon as they encounter Hannibal, they are defeated at the Battle of Ticino up in the north, as you can see in the map. And then they put another army, and they are defeated at the Battle of Trebia. And then a third army, and this army confronts him farther south, closer to Rome, at the Battle of Lake Trasimene, and they are crushed. So it is at this point that the Romans appoint a dictator named Fabius Cunctator, or Fabius the Delayer. Dictator was an official provision in the Roman constitution. In times of emergency, the Senate could appoint someone a dictator for 6 months, and that meant that he had absolute power over that time. In Roman history, there have been many dictators. Most famous one was Cincinnatus, a farmer who and a great general. Every time that Rome needed him, they would go on, Cincinnatus, we need you. So he would put on his uniform, fight, defeat the enemy, and go back to his farm. He became the example of the good citizen, a great public servant who never wanted political power. And the city of Cincinnati is named after him, by the way. So Fabius Cunctator, or Fabius the Delayer, is appointed dictator because it's an emergency. They have lost these three major battles. And Fabius says, you know what? We're not going to fight. Why? Because he's too good. We cannot defeat this guy. But every day that he spends in Italy, without reinforcements, his army becomes weaker and weaker. So we're going to avoid fight. We're going to rebuild our forces. And when the moment is right, we will strike. And it works for a while. But then the Romans they're fed up with this and say, no, we're not cowards. We have to fight him. So when the term of Fabius expires as a dictator, the Romans say, we're going to fight Hannibal. And for this purpose, they put a massive army together. The biggest army Rome had ever assembled. Perhaps some 80,000 men. The battle will take place at the fields of Cannae. Some 80,000 Romans against 35,000 or so Carthaginians. And this is one of the most perfect battles in history. As you can see, the Romans are formed on three different layers. That's what they call Roman legions, right? That's the Roman formation, the equivalent of the phalanx. So the infantry is in the middle, the first line, the second line, and the third is the reserve line. And then on the left, you have the cavalry, and in the back there is a Roman camp. And the Romans always built a camp when going to battle. If you look at the Carthaginians, they have an double echelon formation. They have a central unit, a central phalanx, with the other ones uh, in perpendicular form, almost uh, going down. I'm not in perpendicular form, I'm sorry, in oblique form, that is receding back. There's a big problem and the cavalry on both sides. The big problem for Hannibal is that he has to hold his lines, and he doesn't have enough men, so his lines are very thin. So he's going to concentrate most of his men on the wings. He creates this formation because what happens is that when the battle begins, as you can see, the battle is only taking place in the center. The other sections of the Roman army and the Carthaginian army have not yet encountered each other. As the Romans advance, because they're just massive, what's going to happen? They're going to start pushing the center. And the secret here is for the center to go back, to retreat in an orderly manner. That's one of the most difficult things that an army can do. If you can retreat in order, you stand a chance. If you panic, that's it. As you can see here, the Carthaginians retreat in order. And as they retreat, the Romans lose their control and they just start to move in and in and in. And gradually, the wings of the Carthaginian army start to surround the Romans. The cavalry, then, which is the North African cavalry that Hannibal brought, is much better than the Roman cavalry. They push the Roman cavalry, and once the Roman cavalry retreats, what do? The cavalry comes back and closes the circle in a place that is about the size of Central Park. Over the course of 6 hours in 216 BC, about 60,000 Romans were killed and some 6,000 Carthaginians. That is a 10-to-1 ratio. It is more deaths than you can imagine in a single day. Devastating. The Romans, the survivors, go back. The Romans think that everything is done. There's an account that says that there were even human sacrifices because they were so desperate. Hannibal never attacked Rome. Hannibal decided not to attack, and to this day there's a debate as to why he didn't take Rome. He didn't, and he roamed around. And the more he roamed around, the weaker he became. And remember Fabius, the delayer? He comes back and says, "I told you so." But now they're having a tactic that will weaken Hannibal. Over the next 9 years, Hannibal remains in Italy. In the meantime, the Romans rebuilt an army. They sent one army to Sicily to fight the Carthaginian allies on that island, and they win. They send another army to Spain to take out the possessions of the Carthaginians in Spain. And another army will just shadow Hannibal without ever confronting him. They do confront, however, his brother, who comes to the rescue, and the brother of Hannibal is killed, and Hannibal receives a package with the head of his brother. The Roman army that has won in Spain then is transported to North Africa to threaten Carthage itself. And at that point, Hannibal has to go back to Africa to defend his country, and he is defeated. The one defeat of his life is the Battle of Zama, where a fellow known as Scipios Africanus will defeat the Carthaginians. Hannibal will go into exile. The Romans will pursue him for the rest of his life, and at one point he cannot do anything else and he commits suicide. Carthage will survive as a small, very wealthy republic, but by the year 249 BC, 149 BC, it is an annoyance for Rome, and the Romans decide to just finish them off. And perhaps 300,000 people are killed in the Third Punic War, which is the end of Carthage. In the wake of this, in the aftermath of these Punic Wars, the Romans conquered parts of Spain, parts of Gaul, which is southern France, uh, North Africa, eventually Macedonia, and all of a sudden they have a Mediterranean, a European, and North African empire. They go from a small republic that had limited territorial control over Italy to an empire. And this will have very important consequences for the Romans. As a result of the conquests uh, accomplished by the Republic, there was a crisis that we call the crisis of the Roman Republic. And basically, what happened over the course of this crisis is that some people benefited tremendously from the gains, the imperial gains of the Republic, and some didn't. I'll just give you a couple of examples. A huge number of slaves were captured. That was just part of war. So these slaves were sold in lots by the government, and wealthy people were able to buy these slaves and utilize them in agriculture. So lands that had belonged to the patricians or well-connected people who had not been in use can now be utilized because there's labor. And what's going to happen is that these large estates, known as latifundia, are going to compete with the small states of the regular Roman citizens. And remember, the regular Roman citizens are the ones who serve in the army. That's one crisis. Another one was corruption. The Senate would appoint governors to the new places that had been conquered, called provincia or provinces, and they were appointed for 5 years. And during those 5 years, they had something called the fiscus, which was a basket, and that was their budget. And the law says that this money has to be utilized in administration for 5 years. And at the end of those 5 years, whatever is left in the fiscus, that is, whatever is left in that basket, they can keep. So what do you think these governors did? Of course, they're not going to spend any money on administration to keep the whole pot. Corruption. And of course, many of these governors are going to be ruthless, and they're going to steal. There's this guy called Varus, who was the governor of Sicily. He even took statues from the gardens of the wealthy people and he brought them to Rome to sell them. And then there is the publicani. The term publicanus is a term that refers to tax collectors, tax farmers. You see, Rome did not have an IRS. Rome did not have an organization that enabled them to go and collect taxes to these provinces. So what they did is that they sold the rights of collecting taxes to private citizens, investors. So if you have a lot of money, you pay the government, let's say $1 million for the right to go and collect 5 million from another place. That's tax farming. Now, why does the government do that? Well, the government does that because they don't have any means to collect the money, so they rather get 1 million up front and not worry about anything else. So you pay 1 million to the government, but now you have to collect 5, right? That's your profit. Now, that's not going to be so easy because you have to invest, you have to pay bribes to local officers. So eventually what you do is that you're going to just raise the taxes to make sure that you make money. Corruption again. So it seems that there's a new class of people who are making a lot of money out of this, but in Rome, the old farming class is becoming impoverished. They lose they're going to lose their farms, and they're going to eventually move to Rome. And in Rome, they're going to call proletari. The proletari, prole means offspring, children. And the term proletariat means those people who have a lot of kids. They're poor, unemployed, underemployed, and angry because they think that they have been dealt a bad hand. And out of this comes a new opposition conflict in Rome between optimates and populares. The optimates believe that things are fine, that these people are lazy. The problem is that they have too many kids. And the only solution for the problems of Rome is good Roman values. On the other hand, you have the populares who say, no, we have to make reforms. The populares came from very wealthy families whose young men who are at the age of 18 were sent to Athens to study Greek, and they became fascinated and in love with Greek philosophy and Greek history. They came back with ideas of reform, and they said, we have to reform the system. We have to create a system where there is the wealth is spread around, and where the power is more on the assembly of the people than on the Senate. And those were the two groups, Optimates and Populares. The struggle between Optimates and Populares came to a clash uh, under the leadership of Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus. The Gracchi brothers came from a very wealthy family, uh, well educated. These are the people who would go and study Greek history and learning from the lessons of the Greek past. They understood that there was a need for uh, deep social, political, and economic reform in Rome. Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune of the people, and remember, tribunes could introduce legislation and they had veto power. And Tiberius Gracchus realized that the problem of Rome at the moment was that farmers were losing their land, and as landless people, they were no longer able to serve in the army because there was a land requirement. So he decided that he would dig into an old law that would limit the amount of land someone could own, and he created a commission that would confiscate lands from the wealthy to be granted to the landless poor who live in the city of Rome. And of course, he found opposition, and uh, eventually, a group of senators armed with their supporters armed themselves with clubs, and they went looking for Tiberius Gracchus. And he and about 300 of his supporters were surrounded, and they were beaten to death and then thrown into the river Tiber. And this is shocking because the Romans had not had this type of political violence for centuries. And now, when this crisis emerged, when dialogue stops and the political process can no longer go forward, the resort of the political opponents of the populares is to kill Tiberius and his followers. So this sets a really bad precedent. 10 years later, the younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, is also elected tribune, and he has a wider platform. Yes, he wants redistribution of land for the poor. He also wants subsidized grain for the poor. Grain was very expensive, so you need grain to make bread or porridge. So the government would buy the grain at market prices and would sell it or give it away to the poor. He also wanted the equestrian classes to be in cases in to be access to courts, meaning that they would run the courts. The equestrian class was a group of people who were neither patricians nor plebeians; they were in the middle, very wealthy because they were merchants. Many of them were publicani, those people who were tax farmers, but they believed that they needed representation in the courts so that they could try corrupt patricians. So he proposed giving the judge positions to the equestrians. And number four, Gaius said that Latins and other Italians should get citizenship. Uh, I don't know if you remember, but I told you before that only Romans were citizens, and citizenship was granted only to Latins and other groups. It was a privilege. Now, by this time, there's no difference between Romans, Latins, and other Italians. They all speak the same language, they have the same customs, they have fought together. So Gaius is saying everyone in Italy should be a citizen of Rome. This, of course, brings about another crisis. His opponents, the Optimates, uh, hire a group of archers who were stationed near Rome, and they start to move against Gaius and his supporters. So there is actually a street fight where they're trying to kill Gaius, and his supporters are trying to hold back the people who want to kill him. He escapes, but eventually he realizes that his enemies are very close, so he commits suicide. And in the aftermath of this, the Optimates take control over Rome, and they kill probably about 3,000 of his supporters, all illegal, of course. So the victories that come after the Punic Wars and the conquest are going to benefit only a few. And when the social, economic, and political problems of the Republic emerge, Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus want to find a solution, and their opponents kill them. And this is the beginning of a long, long period that sometimes is known as the late crisis of the late Republic, or sometimes the Roman Revolution. And what happens is that over the course of the next 100 years, Rome will do two things. It will become, it will sink into this never ending cycle of civil wars between generals, between politicians, between families. And at the same time, incredibly, they are going to conquer more territory, which is the most unusual thing. How can a republic that is involved in very bloody civil wars can still expand? But they manage to do that. And one of the reasons is that under a consul by the name of Marius, who was a member of the Populares, military reforms were carried. The land requirement to be a soldier was eliminated, and the army became a professional force. Basically, any Roman could enlist, and they would enlist for 25 years. And at the end of they would get a salary. At the end of those 25 years, they would get a pension, a piece of land. And that meant that the cohesiveness of the old citizen army was lost, because now what you have is armies that uh, are loyal to their generals. These generals are no longer just republican generals, they are warlords. So Marius carries out these reforms, which saves Rome as an empire, but basically brings down Rome as a republic. The Roman armies are very successful in battle, and eventually they conquer more territories. But because the loyalty was personal, it creates the stage for civil war. So Marius will fight against the guy Sulla. Eventually, three generals, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, create something called the First Triumvirate, which is an unofficial shadow government of three generals who will run everything behind the scenes. Of course, it doesn't work out. Crassus gets killed in a battle, so Pompey and Caesar go to war. Pompey gets killed, and Caesar assumes the title of dictator until he is assassinated. After the assassination of Caesar, a second triumvirate, that is a second group of three men, a government of three men, is formed by Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. Octavian was the nephew of Caesar, but he was his adopted son. Mark Antony was the right-hand man of Caesar. And Lepidus was just some guy who happened to be there. Actually, he was not just some guy. He was the commander of the cavalry, but he was not really that important. He was in the right place at the right time, so he became part of the second triumvirate. But very soon after that, he was kind of pushed aside because he knew he was not playing in the same league as the other two. Mark Antony is famous because he became the lover of Egyptian Queen Cleopatra, and he confronted Octavian in war. At the Battle of Actium, the forces of Octavian defeated Mark Antony. Cleopatra committed suicide, and soon he committed suicide too. And without any opposition, Octavian changed his name to Augustus, Caesar Augustus, and he established something called the Principate, which is the end of the Republic. The Principate is really the beginning of the Roman Empire as a political system. Octavian, who is now called Augustus, basically continued to have the same institutions: consuls, tribunes, the Senate, the assembly, but these were just they were just props, because as princeps, I'm sorry, which means the first citizen, Augustus had the power of consul, the power of the Senate, the power of tribunes, and the power of commanding the armies. And that power was called imperium, and that's where the word imperator or emperor comes from. So even though there was still a Senate and two consuls and tribunes and all the other offices, All of this was a charade because the person running everything was Augustus. He was a real emperor. And with this comes the end of the Republic, but also the beginning of the Pax Romana, which is the era where Rome ruled most of the Mediterranean and really uh, uh, created this incredible civilization that is the foundation of the West. In this map, we can see how vast the Roman Republic was by the year 44 BC. This is when Caesar was dictator and when he was assassinated. By the time of Augustus, the extension of the republic was greater. All of North Africa, actually the Mediterranean Sea, was called Mare Nostrum, our sea, because it was all controlled by the Romans. Egypt, uh, eventually Britain and parts of what today is Germany, eventually Romania and all of Asia Minor and parts of the Crimea in southern Russia. That all became part of the Roman Empire. And in that empire, they established their language, their law, their architecture, their roads. Pax Romana, meaning the Roman peace, was indeed one of the greatest periods of prosperity in history. And it is actually during this period that in one little corner of the empire, in Palestine, uh, a boy is born by the name of Jesus. And at this time, he's very unimportant. But later in history, he will become the seed from which Christianity will emerge. And Christianity will, even though it's not an empire, it will become an incredible cultural force that will also they will reshape the Roman Empire and will also become one of the foundational stones of what we call the West today.